Hi, my name is Duff. I'm the principal at Freewater Elementary School.
My name is Muilenburg, and I'm the principal at Grove Elementary School.
And we'd like to talk to you a little bit about the exciting, new, hopefully, elementary school that's happening at Milton-Freewater, Gib Olinger Elementary School, and the Grove Sports Complex. And what we want to talk about a little bit is about some of the process that has gone into just the idea or the conceptual plan that we have. What that started out with was a committee, a facilities committee of not only district folks, including teachers and administrators, but also community folks that showed interest to the district that they wanted to be a part of this group. That group met several times from the announcement in October that we found out about the wonderful gift from the Valley Foundation.
So a highlight for me on being on this facilities committee was being able to go and visit some of the new buildings that have been built in the area. We visited 4 to 6 buildings in the College Place area in Pendleton.
And so what that looked like actually was that group of facility folks getting on a Milton-Freewater school bus and driving over to College Place to Walla Walla, and then that next week it was actually a couple folks that went over to Pendleton. And so we got to see everything from, in Walla Walla, a building that was renovated 10 years ago. And so you see the progression of that construction to College Place, which is just recently having students in it. And so you see some major differences, and we'll talk about a couple of those. And then you see Pendleton, where we walked through a building that's under its first year with students in it, and then another building that still had the sticks, they were still building it. And so you see that whole progression. And so part of that facilities team was, if we have a blank slate, after seeing all of these campuses, and we talk about the things that we want most for our students to make the best education for our teachers, what components of those buildings do we want?
And the community members brought a lot of insight into it too, because they were looking at it not from an educator's lens, but how could we also use these facilities for community events?
And so things like making sure that the basketball court is a full-size court that can be used by the high school, and that it's not in the center of the campus, that it's accessible from a parking lot that's nearby, so that on weekends you can go directly into that facility and don't have to go through the main door of the campus. So there's some things like that that were kind of aha moments, and so it really was a team of 20 or so that came through and said, oh, okay, this is why we need to do that. Another component to that was the pickup and drop off. So we had a bus driver that's on that committee, and they talked about, we have got to make sure that where parents pick up and drop off is separate from where the buses do, so that they're not running into each other. And so little things like that. And so that was one of the exciting things that group got to do, was start with a blank slate, and then take all the parts and pieces and build your own school.
Could you show that?
Yeah.
The pieces?
Yeah. And so what they would do is we would have these scaled drawings, and then we would have scaled pieces. So for instance, we were talking about the bus section. And so you have a scaled picture of a bus to scale, and then you also have classrooms in different configurations that we saw on our tours. And so if you have a classroom set up here, which way do you want the buses? Do you want them going like that or like that? Do you want them on this street or on this street? And so you talk about all of those problems and issues that come up. And so it was a really good opportunity for that group to come up. So they came up with a couple ideas. And then what we felt like coming out of that was not only making sure that group was able to look at that, but we wanted the community to really have the opportunity to grab those. So at least half a dozen events, these were placed out. So one of the events I know was at Grove Elementary School, and we talked about the bond project there, and we had probably in between 30 and 50 people that were there.
Yep.
And they split into groups, and they talked about different aspects and different needs that they needed. And so the other couple spots that they went to was over Christmas break. We had these available at both Burger Hut and Sub Shop on occasions. And so as folks were eating lunch or breakfast, they could sit down and kind of look at what they wanted in a school. And one of the really important things that came out of that was the need for fields. And we know in Milton-Freewater we have active youth, and we have needs for fields. And so originally the Grove area was going to be used for baseball fields. Well, if you take the model drawings and you put them on there, a regulation sized baseball field doesn't fit. And the concern from the community was that that is a huge need, that not only do we need a baseball field, but it needs to be regulation sized because we want to host tournaments, which brings economic development into the region, but also allows our students to have that opportunity to be involved in those tournaments. And so that was one of the reasons why, at that point, that property shifted. The other thing that came out of that community times was we want a spot to be dedicated for each thing. And so what ended up happening was the Grove area will be used for fields, soccer fields. You could do Pop Warner football on those fields. And then the Gib Olinger site will be used for baseball, and it'll have 2 regulation-sized baseball fields or softball you can play on.
I think another important thing is staff. We also put these up in each of the buildings, the elementary buildings, and allowed staff to have input. Obviously, from the staff standpoint, they're going to be looking more at the use of the building itself and meeting their classroom needs. We went to a couple of the schools that had the pod model, which means that you have a wider space between the actual classrooms, and that pod allows for you to have grade level meetings, grade level assemblies. It also allows windows that are in the classroom that you can pop out and the teacher can hear and see what different assistants are working with students on. It just really allows us to utilize every inch of that space.
So what that pod, the difference in between the pod and maybe what folks are used to in an elementary is a classic elementary built probably in the last 15 years may utilize those, but before that you would have an elementary with a hallway about 10 feet wide, and then up and down it would just be the doors going into the classrooms. What the pod does is take that 10-foot wide hallway and makes it into about a 30-foot wide area. And that allows for things like Amy was talking about. If you want to do a second grade assembly, all the second grade doors open up into the pod. You don't have to utilize the gym and interrupt PE class. You can have that assembly. What I saw at College Place with students right in the spot was that entire grade level, students working at their ability groups throughout the entire space. So instead of only students having their classroom to work in, the teacher had groups of 5 or 6 kids outside of that space in that pod area working with assistants. And so it was a lot more one-to-one or as close as you could to adult to student support. So just one of those things that as we took tours and went to facilities and talked to staff, is like that's something we would utilize, and that's something that came really high up that we wanted.
Came priority for us.
That's right. And one of the things also that facilities group looked at was not only we're talking about Gib Olinger and we're talking about Grove, but when we're talking about all these neat education things and what the community wants are, what can we do to existing buildings? And the committee identified a couple things. The first one was safety. And so if you see part of that bond, one of the major components is a safety component at each building, trying to make those campuses safer. Other components are making sure that large things like HVAC, so heating and air conditioning systems, are not only replaced, but replaced using energy efficient tools. And that way, we're reducing the annual cost for the district, because that's what we want to try to do during this process is work smarter, not harder. And so also looking at things like roofs and replacing a roof, because if the roof goes bad, everything underneath it's going to go bad, as we all know. So.
I think why we're talking how we're being good stewards of the financial piece is we know that the long-term goal and hope for us is that we build a new building. With that, we still have to run for the next 2 years the buildings that we currently have, and so we're making sure that if we're purchasing new updated equipment that we are in communication with the facility that we anticipate that equipment will go to. Like for example Grove, when that is torn down, where are the electronic things going to go? And so making sure that we're
Yeah.
being cognizant of short-term and long-term planning for those things.
We want to make every penny stretch as long as we can, because we don't have too many pennies, and we know nobody does. And so making sure that everything that we can reuse, make sure it's working well.
And the example you'd given earlier was that you had bought some projectors back in
Yeah.
September, and could you?
Yeah, and so, we didn't find out about this opportunity until October. Well, we had a need to purchase projectors, so Freewater used part of their budget to buy projectors, which are used probably 90% of the day by teachers, and they display what they're working on, whether it's overhead things or they're working through programs and items like that. So they're really an essential tool. There's not a classroom that doesn't have them. And so we have HD projectors this year, and those projectors will be taken, they're mobile, and we purchased them in a way that they'll be used in another facility. So the 4-5 building will be at Ferndale, so the 4-5 building will have new projectors in it that'll come from Freewater. We don't need to go purchase another set. That's not a good use of taxpayer dollars.
So you guys are all communicating with each other
Yep.
and trying to
Yeah,
make sure that.
And one of the nice things about that is that some buildings don't have as much technology. So I think they're looking forward to getting some of the technology that are at Grove and Freewater and being able to utilize that in their buildings too. And so really adding to the entire package for our students. So as that committee kind of progressed, one of the things that we did is we worked with an architect, and that architect helped us come up with a couple drawings and ideas. And that architect has worked on several schools, which was very helpful. They went through and talked about some of the important aspects of when they build a school or a facility, what they're looking for. And so what we came up with, and what I kind of think is interesting, one of the fun parts is, we started with a blank slate, and then as we worked through, the community groups and the school groups and everything else, it's progressed to a conceptual drawing. So this isn't the end result, but this is where we're at right now. This is a pretty good idea of what a new elementary Gib Olinger would look like. And so you can see some of those, things. Everybody's had a piece to that. So if you think about that bus driver, you have the buses are picking up students over here, and you have parents picking up over here. So they're in two separate places. And we talked about the gymnasium and the importance of having that outside. So not only is the gymnasium accessible without having to go through the main building, but it also is right next to the parking. So if you have an evening basketball game, folks can park and access the gym easily.
Same with the ball fields. They're right there as well.
Yeah, and the other thing, a couple other things that came up during that when we were talking to the community was, you don't want to have all these events and not have a place to go to the bathroom or sell something out of, doing our concessions. And so that was one thing that was added to it, because if you're going to do it, you might as well do it once, do it right. We don't need to spend all the money in the world on it, but we don't want to have to go back and spend more than we would have.
I think the other thing that when you walked around and looked after each group had their opportunity is it was very apparent that this building needed to be at the front of this lot, so that as people were driving by, looking around, they could see the brand new building, and very similar to College Place. You can't go past College Place without not help but notice that there's new buildings.
I think we want pride in our facilities. And so you'll see the Walla Walla River runs here, and Highway 11 is right here. So you'll see that building right when you come into town. It'll be exciting. So, we talked about the pod setup. So these would be the classrooms. It'd be a 2-story building, and these would be classrooms, and then above that it would look like the same thing. And these are the pod areas that we were talking about, where the classrooms spill into those areas and can be utilized. If you look at a lot of the conceptual drawings, they had this running all together. And that would have been great, but we have a couple problems with that. First off, if you do that, you lose some of the ability to do the baseball fields and make them regulation size. The other very important thing is that there's an enormous wellhead that's right here, and we can't cover that wellhead up. And so you can't physically run that building like that and have that. So it's kind of some of the interesting things that come up when the architect sends out a picture. You go, well, that's not, that's pretty close to what we were talking about. Why is that? Well, this, and this.
The other thing that was, you heard a lot of people get frustrated with is they wanted to put the kitchen in somewhere, you know, in the middle of the building. However, we have deliveries. So you have to make sure that you have access to deliveries for food services. So it was always fun to hear that, oh man, that won't work.
And this will be a secure campus, so it will have a fence that'll be around it, so kids won't be able to run onto the streets or anything like that. The access for visitors will be right through the doors, and so some of the things we see in school buildings now are you have access, people can come into almost like a little bit of a lobby, and then they're buzzed through from there. And so it's not an immediate access. And,
the entire campus can be locked down with the push of a button. It can also be sectioned off, and that's all controlled here in the front office area.
So safety is one of the big things that we looked at throughout the entire process.
We also heard some folks were talking about, what about these beautiful trees and preserving as much of the landscape that's there. And so we definitely are, that's a priority as well. And so there's a plan to bring an arborist in and identify what trees are safe to continue to have and still get this conceptual drawing of what the different fields that we want. You can also see that we will be replanting greenery throughout to beautify that current space.
So it's an opportunity, and it'll be an opportunity, an ongoing opportunity for the community, I believe, because there's been a lot of input from the entire community, including district staff and board members and people that walked down the street, people that went to Burger Hut and got a breakfast sandwich and were able to say something about it. And that is how we want this to go, because this is our community school and we all have ownership in it. And there'll be an opportunity, I'm sure, as we're going through this process, that everybody will be able to have their hands get dirty and be able to say, you know, I was part of this process.
And also preserving some of the different things from the buildings. We don't have an actual plan of how we're going to do that yet, but that is definitely in the works, and trying to identify what we can preserve, where we can put it, how you can preserve it, so that we can meet the needs and kind of just combine all of those different pieces of our community.
Yeah.
Talk about
and then the Grove Complex. So the other project that we're working on is the Grove Athletic Complex. And we talked a little bit earlier about how that started out, the committee and kind of community started talking about baseball diamonds being there. But one of the major things that everyone talked about was that they have to be regulation size so that we can hold tournaments. And you can't fit a regulation size field on that property. And so what came about that was having the ability to have 2 soccer fields there, regulation size, or you can make 6 youth soccer fields there. Also making that facility so it's fenced in, making parking available, making restrooms available, and making a concession area available there. And so that property will be really used well. The other thing it'll have is a walking path that'll be around it. And I know a lot of people in Milton-Freewater are looking for a place to walk and off the street. And so that'll be a really nice, I think, addition to our community in that neighborhood area.
One thing I'd forgotten to ask you guys earlier, is there going to be a play set there?
There's been some conversation about making sure that there's some basketball areas there to play in, and there may be some playset areas, and that's still part of the conversation, that community conversation. So when we talk about things like that, I'm making a note of that. You know, one of the things that came up with that is kind of on the lines of the playset was making sure that it was fenced in. At first we were talking about, well, you know, do you really want to spend that money on the fence? Do you want it to have that feel? Until I talked about my 3-year-old, and I don't want my 3-year-old running onto the street. And so that's why, you know, one of the reasons why we talked about fencing it in, and that way, you know, in the spring, summer, and fall, when all these fields are just getting used every day, which will be great, it'll be a safe place to have them get used.
One of the questions that I've been asked is, why are we focusing, or why is this a portion of this grant? You would assume we're a school district, we would only focus on building a new school. And this was part of the stipulations that we were given from the Valley Foundation, is they didn't want another eyesore or empty building or something that wasn't useful to the community. So they requested that we build a sports complex that provided activities for our youth.
A neat addition. So,
I think it's important to note that these are just conceptual plans. Nothing is in stone here. We just needed to somehow generate ideas so that we could communicate with folks what the vision was.
yeah. And so the vision is your opportunity, and your opportunity starts in May, and ballots are due May 17th. And what we want to make sure, and this was something that that group of 24 folks wanted to make sure during the entire process, is that it's an open process. That all the things that we talk about are public knowledge, and we want public input on all of those things. And what we really want to make sure of is that people have the right information, and the right information is factual information. And so I know that I'm available at Freewater Elementary anytime. If anybody has a question, they can stop by the office and talk to me about that, or they can call the Freewater School at 938-6611. I'd be happy to talk to them about any questions. I may not have the answer to it, but I'll sure try to get it to them.
Or if you want to share ideas
Yeah.
that maybe you weren't able to attend one of these events, or something that came up as you toured around and thought might be a good idea, and I'm willing to visit with anyone. I'm at Grove Elementary School. My number is 541-938-3233.
So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.